Hey everybody, welcome to class. We still have a few minutes until we get into the review session, but for now, good to see you all and I hope you're doing well. Yeah, so just hang in there and we'll be ready to go in about 4 minutes. Hey Moises, how's it going? Oh, that's good. Yeah, we're at the halfway point of the semester pretty much, and so it's sometimes we start to hit the wall a little bit, but we got the spring break coming up, so that's always nice. Hi Tina, how's it going? Good to see you. Hey Catherine, welcome back. Couple minutes. Hi everybody, welcome Summer. Hi Alicia. Hey Sylvia, AJ, Brandon. Nice to be with you guys today. Angelina, Anthony. Yep, things are going pretty well right now, I guess. Hey Nicholas, Diego, welcome. Hey there, David. Carson, good to see you too. Hey there, guys. Spencer, Maria, Jack, how's it going? Hey Daniel, Isaac. Oh, thanks, David. Yes, true enough. It is my birthday. So I appreciate the well wishes. It's always nice to have another year. Yeah, it's funny having a birthday on St. Patrick's Day. Used to be a very festive day when everyone wants to get together. Of course, right now we're kind of distanced. But yeah, appreciate you guys' attendance as always. Thanks for being here on my birthday. I guess this is the birthday party pretty much. Review session time. So yeah, guys, perfect. Let's get things started. As everybody knows, today is the review session for the upcoming midterm that happens on Monday. Yeah, happy St. Patrick's Day, and yeah, I'm happy to have another birthday. They keep coming. I guess I liked them a little more when I was a bit younger, but Still young at heart, I suppose. So anyways, it's a nice day, and I'm glad to be with you guys. So let's go back to our review session stuff, okay? You guys have all received the study guide. And so what I would ask you to do now, if you can, is to just pull up your copy of it. If you already have one downloaded, please, pull it up on your screen. And what we're going to do is cover as many of the questions on the study guide as we can together as a group right now. So there's a list of questions on the study guide, 43 in total. And basically all you got to do is tell me which ones that you want to talk about, and then we'll have all of these students and me as well try to help you out with the information and the content that you would want for an answer. Now, the way that I like to do review sessions is to have it mostly be student-driven. So I like it when the students take up the initiative and kind of provide the information on their own, and then I kind of intervene to add clarity, to expand on things, and to make whatever little corrections if necessary to the stuff you're writing in the chat. So it's not a normal day where I'm going to lecture on anything. I have nothing to teach per se, but I will help you review. So I throw it over to you now. The floor is yours. Here in this chat, go ahead and start calling out whichever question that you want to talk about. And I'll just take them in whichever order that I see them here in the chat. So you've got the list. Okay, so Nicholas talked to about 17. Okay, so what number 17 says, I'm looking at the list on my end. It says, explain an objection to Pascal's wager. Okay, so if this question were to be selected, just a little bit of a word about the format. On the day of the test, you're going to see a examination form which has about 11 or so of these questions on it. And I'll ask you to answer like 7 or something out of those 11 questions. So ultimately, you'll have to do about 7 questions within the time frame of the class period, 2:30 to 3:45 on Monday. Nobody knows which 11 or so questions that I will select. So that's why we want to be prepared to answer, whichever ones, hopefully as many as you possibly could. So let's start with 17, like I said. Thanks, everybody. It is a happy birthday, so I'm glad to be celebrating it with you. Number 17. So it says this, explain an objection to Pascal's wager. So if this question were selected, the first thing anybody would have to do is at least tell me what is Pascal's wager so that we know what the objection is referring to. So go ahead then. Who can just tell me anything very basic about the Pascal's wager? Also, just so you know, I'm replying to all the email requests for grades, and I'm still going through them. If you sent me one, trust me, you're going to get your response within that 48-hour frame of time that I talked about before. I'm scanning the actual pages that you submitted to me with my handwritten notes on them. So it just takes a little while to, scan all those things and send them off to each individual student and to write the message. But not to worry, if you've sent me a request for a grade, they'll certainly be answered in the short amount of time. But back to this question for our review. Pascal's wager. Okay, Alicia, good. You say that it is best to believe in God because if you're wrong, you lose nothing, and if you're right, you gain heaven. Pretty much. So this is also, what I'm going to say right now is also something that I guess could help you in the previous question of 16. So Pascal says no one could ever prove whether God exists or not, so don't even try. It's impossible because he's, an infinite being if he does exist, and that means he's beyond our ability to understand. So no way to prove God exists nor to disprove it, but at the same time, we know that he either exists or does not exist. It's got to be one or the other, and it can't be both. So the question isn't so much can we prove it, but rather which side are you going to take? What bet or wager are you going to make on the question of God's existence? So he compares it to a coin flip. He says with a coin flip, there's 2 sides that could possibly show up. You could have heads or you could have tails, but nobody knows which side will land until the coin has landed. In a similar way, we can never know whether God exists or not, but we know he must exist or not. So why should we believe? Okay, in Pascal's wager, he says believing is much better for you because you really don't risk anything and you have a lot that you might gain. So the risk to reward ratio is very good when you believe. You're not really risking much and you can get a huge reward. So that's nice, but if you don't believe, the equation is just flipped. You're at a huge risk if you're wrong and you have nothing to gain if you're right. So he thinks, why would anybody who wants to protect against their, insure against loss and have their self-interest motivated, why wouldn't they just choose to believe? Because what do you have to lose, basically? If you win everything. If you lose nothing. But with the other bet of disbelief, if you win nothing, and if you lose everything. Okay, so what are some objections to that? In our class, we've talked about a couple of different authors who could be utilized as objections to Pascal's wager. So who can tell me what's one of those possible authors who writes something that could be given as an objection to the wager? Go ahead. Two authors that were discussed just following the material on Pascal's wager. Many of you guys wrote and reported on these objections in your papers, so I know that the knowledge is in there. So let me know. One possible critic or so forth of the Pascal's wager. You can't just believe in something due to hope, Jasmine. Right. So, Kirsten, you're naming the two authors, Clifford and McKim. Let's go by each one by one. What is Clifford's view? Clifford says that it's wrong to believe anything, anywhere, anytime, anyone, that's not based on sufficient evidence. He gives the example of the ship owner. He says, consider this example of ship owner. That's right, Catherine. The ship owner knows that his ship is dangerously unsafe, but he kind of hopes that it will be able to make one more journey despite all that very clear evidence. So he goes with his hope instead of the evidence. Suppose the ship does sink. That's bad, and it's his fault, so he did something wrong. Suppose it does not sink, and he gets lucky. Still, it was wrong, though, because there was a definite risk that he put people to when he allowed it to sail, knowing how dangerous and unsafe it was. So what he takes away from this example is that it's just wrong to believe things just because you hope they're true. The only reason that you should ever believe something is because there's sufficient evidence to prove it. So when Pascal says, believe in God, but by the way, I can't prove it, nor can you, just believe in it because hopefully you will be right, that's not the right kind of reason to believe something. You need evidence, and that would make it reasonable to think so. Now, Robert McKim, he says that God's hidden, meaning like you can't just, easily just check and see that he's there, like with me or with you or with, anything else that you can perceive with your senses. So God can't be quite perceived, and in that sense, he's hidden. So Robert McKim argues that if he is hidden, he's not acting in a way that makes you think he cares whether we believe in him. Because if God is this almighty being who could do anything, then he could reveal himself at any point, and then he could easily get us to believe in him. So since he's not trying to, make it impossible to disbelieve, maybe he's not even interested whether you believe or not. And on the assumption that God does not care whether you believe or not, Pascal's wager no longer has any force, because the wager involves a claim that God would punish those that don't believe and reward those that do. Absent this assumption, the wager has no stakes. So there's no reason then to think that disbelief is less safe than belief is. Okay, two different objections to Pascal's wager. So let's go from there. What's next? You've got questions, and we'll try to give answers. But we're doing it together, so just let me know where you want to take the next question. Only you know which ones you want to ask about, so I'm just waiting. When you're ready to go, you'll let us know what that next question is. Okay, so Catherine, you speak about number 8. Alicia, you've referred to a few. So I'll take them in the order I see. Let's pause and just deal with this little batch. Okay, so number 8, it says, explain Taylor's cosmological argument. Jasmine, you have a study guide. You have to open your study guide that I sent last week on Wednesday. No, today is Wednesday, so it was Friday. I sent them on Friday to you. So just open your titanium announcements. Go to the study guide. You should have been looking at that study guide already because you've had it for 5 days. But anyway, it's midterm review right now. Number 8. The question is Taylor's cosmological argument. Okay, so Jasmine, you're going to see it in your inbox. You're going to see it in your email folder. Or if you go to the titanium page for our class, then you'll see it in the announcements. Okay, cool. Thank you. So now we're all on the same page. Catherine, number 8. Taylor's cosmological argument. Okay. Run it back. Tell me what's that cosmological argument. Somebody just give me some things to go from. What did Taylor say? how did this man Taylor try to prove that God exists? Taylor, cosmological argument. So what is the cosmological argument? You got to meet me halfway. So it's not just going to be, hey, professor, tell me again, and then you just sit back. Can't be passive. We need you engaged. So help me give the answer. No worries. Okay, so Kirsten says the universe cannot be caused by itself. That's one basic piece, yes. There's a lot of missing pieces that we can expand on from there. Okay, so what's the first example that Mr. Taylor gave in his paper? He starts by saying, imagine that a person walking around the woods and they see something like what? Richard Taylor, 1963, Cosmological Argument article. He gives a hypothetical scenario to get the whole thing started. So he says, imagine a person saw a sphere. Yes, not the watch, Diego. You're thinking of Paley. That's another example from a different author. But fair enough, it's something in the woods. We're sticking with Taylor, though. Taylor says, yeah, suppose you saw a sphere. Okay, so what? If you saw the sphere, then you would start thinking thoughts. Like what thoughts? So we start with the sphere. Point is what? That if you saw something like that, weird, unusual, you might pause and think things like what? Hey, River, good to see you. How did it get there? That's right, Diego. How did it get there? What's the reason that it's there? What caused it in the first place? Because it's so strange, you might, you would have to think, at least for a moment, weird, how did that get there? Okay, so then he says, usually we only have those kind of curious thoughts. Where did that come from when something's out of place or unusual? But if you really think about it, you could ask that same question for anything. Me, you, objects around you, where did it come from? Okay, so everything, therefore, has to have some kind of cause or explanation. And that's what is called the principle of sufficient reason. So this sphere example leads to the establishment of the principle of sufficient reason. The principle of sufficient reason says everything has to have a cause or an explanation if it's something that's true. Okay, so after that, there's a description of two types of truths. Now, Alicia, I see that you're referring to them, contingent and necessary truths. Question, though, to all of us, what is contingent or necessary truth? What's the definition of a contingent truth? And what's the definition of a necessary truth? So that's the next point in this question. Let me know. You got a lot of it there, Alicia, and that's good. You say the universe must have been caused by a necessary being since it is contingent, and if it was caused by something contingent, that would lead to an infinite regress, which is impossible. All I have to add to that to make it a perfect response, together with what we've already said about the principle of sufficient reason and the sphere thing, is what are contingent and necessary truths. So, David, you're defining contingent truth. Things that are true, but they could have been false. Can you give me an example of something like that? And while you're doing that, someone tell me what's a necessary truth. Definition of necessary truth. So yeah, contingent truths, they are things that are true, but they didn't need to be. They could have been false had things played out a bit differently. Now, on the other hand, what's a necessary truth? Okay, so David, you give the example of an asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. Sure, I guess because that happened, they're not here. But if it never happened, suppose the asteroid missed, like we hope that never happens again, then they might have survived and continued to live on. Necessary truth, things that are true and could not possibly be false. That's right, thank you. Could not possibly be false. So Kirsten, I'm glad you corrected that. Okay, so I'm going to give you some examples too. I'm wearing a striped sweater, right? That's true, but it's contingent. It's contingent on me just feeling like putting it on this morning. I could have decided not to. I could have just worn a t-shirt, a different color sweater. I could have, a lot of options in my wardrobe. So though I am wearing this, it easily could have been false if I made a different choice. On the other hand, 2 + 2 is 4 is not the same kind of thing, because 2 + 2 is 4, and it's not something that depends on, how something goes out in that day. Like some days it's true, other days it might not be true. No, that's something that has to be true regardless of what the facts or circumstances may be in the world. So, okay, contingent truths, the principle of sufficient reason says they have to have a cause or an explanation. After this, it is mentioned and noted that the universe is contingent. The whole universe is something that does exist but might not have existed. And that is claimed because each part of it and everything inside of it is temporary and has a finite amount of duration. So the universe seems to be contingent. That means that based on the principle of sufficient reason, there must be a cause for it. Now, the cause of the universe, as you said above, Alicia, it can't be the universe itself. Just like a cake cannot bake itself. That makes no sense. It would have to already be there to be the thing causing itself, which is just illogical. On the other hand, it's also not possible that something contingent has caused the universe. Because if something that depends on something else is the cause of all these things in the universe, then that thing would have to have a cause also, which sets us up for an infinite regress, which is thought to be impossible. So whatever the cause of our contingent universe is, has to be something that does not depend on anything, and that would be a necessary being, which is God. So everything except for God is contingent, but God is necessary, and everything follows from him, but he has no source or origin that causes him. Okay, so like very briefly, a repeat of those major points. The example of the sphere shows the principle of sufficient reason. There are contingent and necessary truths. The universe is contingent, thus, according to the principle, it must have a cause, but what the cause is could not be contingent itself, otherwise there'd be an infinite regress, which is considered to be impossible. So the cause of the universe and all things is a necessary being, and that's the God, the creator. Okay, so let's continue from there to the next question you may have, and I'm looking above. Alicia, you mentioned 33 and 6, so let me look at those. Okay, so Peter Singer, in his paper, Rich and Poor, this is about question 33. What it says is, explain why Singer says that the problem of global hunger is not a problem of scarcity of resources. So Peter Singer argues that we have a moral obligation to assist somehow the global poor that are starving in the third world. And he says that some people might argue there's no way to help this problem because we simply could never have enough food for everybody. There are too many people and not enough food. So that would be saying that it's a problem of scarcity of resources. But Peter Singer doesn't agree with that. He says, no, it's not because we don't have or couldn't have enough food. So why does he say that it's not a problem of scarcity? If it's not about scarcity, then what is the issue? What is causing global hunger, if not the fact that there's no way to create enough food for everyone? Just go back in your notes, memory, or the book, and tell me why he thought that it's not so much about the lack of sufficient food for everyone. Not about scarcity, but it's a problem of what? That's right, poor distribution of resources and also waste. Correct, guys. Why does he say that it has to do with poor distribution of resources and waste? One reason is because of the over-reliance on animal agriculture in our Western world and in our diet. According to what some research shows, we waste a lot of consumable resources by diverting them to farm animals that we're trying to raise for market consumption. And if we ate less meat and we were raising fewer animals on factory farms, then we could convert many of the resources that we devote to them to feeding human beings, and that would result in a huge gain in efficiency and a bigger surplus of available food. So one thing is that people eat too much meat, we rely too much on animal agriculture, and that basically wastes consumable resources. The other thing is just that we buy food that we then, in many cases, throw away, either by tossing it into the trash and it goes to the landfill, or getting more than we can really eat, and then it goes in the trash in that case. So if we were a little bit more frugal with our consumer choices and spending and consumption, and if we perhaps de-emphasize the role of meat in the West, then we would actually have additional food and in sufficient amount to feed all the people that need it. So he says, don't think that it's not, we could never produce enough food. We could, but we make decisions as individuals and societies that mismanage and waste the available resources. Okay, so that would be 33. Now, Alicia, you also asked about 36, so let me just go over to that. 36, Singer's reply to two of the differences between killing and failing to assist. Okay, so the same article, I can see this is one you want to talk about, Alicia, there. What are differences between killing and failing to assist, according to the essay? Like on the one hand, someone going out to kill people. On the other hand, someone like me or you just not providing money to the poor. What's the difference between killing and then declining to give aid? He lists 5 differences. So first thing that this question would have to deal with is reporting on at least what 2 of those differences are. So that we have all the options, let's try and say what those 5 differences were. if you could briefly say some of them. So you're going back now in your notes to Peter Singer. Okay, Tina, one, different motivation. Correct. Also, what else is different? Yep, got different motivation. Good. Also, what else? Okay, Tina, not hard to avoid killing, but very hard to save lives by giving money or aid. Yes. So level of difficulty is different. Motivation is different. Certainty of the outcome is the third one. That's also different. There's two more. There's identifiability of the victim. Yes. And then the last one is that concerning the global poor. You can say, I didn't make these people poor, and so I didn't cause them to be poor. It's not my fault that they are. So therefore, I've not got any obligation to attend to their needs or to help fix the problem. But of course, when a person kills, there's no similar way of excusing their personal responsibility for these deaths. I mean, if you're the killer, they're dead because of you. But you can say that people are starving and dying, and that's not because of you. So even though you can try and help, you're not obligated to do it because you didn't cause their problem. Okay, so those are 5 differences, but the question, if you read it, asks, how does Peter Singer come back and reject those points? So let's go through some of the things he says. Motivation and certainty of the outcome. With these two, he points out that someone who sets out to kill people has a way worse motive than the person who just doesn't want to give money to the poor and instead spends it on themselves. Because like, if I buy this watch, I'm not thinking when I buy it, forget the poor. I'm glad that they're going to die because I'm buying this watch and they're not getting my money. No, I'm just thinking of the watch myself and what I want with it. No problem, Mia. Good to see you. So what I was trying to say, though, is that the motive of the killer is to end people's lives. Like, you know, there was a shooting yesterday in Atlanta, terrible things, the biggest mass shooting since we've gone to pandemic lockdown and all that. But, you know, what's the guy trying to do? He's trying to kill people. He's trying to hurt and make people die. So that's terrible. That's evil. That's wicked. But you could say that our motivation when we don't give money to the poor is nothing like that. It's not like we're trying to hurt people. We're just thinking of our own happiness and what we want to do with our own money. Okay. Now, despite this, right, the homicidal driver, comparing that to the drunk driver. Does this mean the drunk driver's done nothing wrong? Because, you know, the homicidal driver is trying to hit people, whereas the drunk driver is just doing something that could lead to people being hit, but it's not what he wants. It's still wrong. The drunk driver's behavior is still wrong because it's negligent and it causes more risk for people. Even if he doesn't want people to be hit, he's adding risk to the world by doing that. So when you fail to assist the poor, you can argue that you're not desiring anyone to be harmed, but you're still knowingly contributing through your declining to aid to the pool of risk that some people will face. So that makes it wrong on par with this reckless driver, this drunk. Same with certainty of the outcome. The drunk driver may hit people, but it's not quite as certain as if someone got behind the wheel totally sober trying to hit people on purpose because they want to murder them. So certainly the homicidal driver is a bigger, more potent threat in terms of how many people they could hurt and the likelihood they would hurt people compared with our drunk driver example. But again, this doesn't remove all the blame from the drunk driver because they're still adding to risk through their behavior. So even if it's not as certain to cause harm, as in the case where you're trying to do it on purpose, it still very well adds to the risk, and that makes it wrong enough. Just like when you fail to aid the poor, you don't. It's not as certain maybe that anyone's going to be hurt. Maybe the money might have been wasted or something, even if you had given it. But by withholding on the aid, you're still making things a little bit more likely to harm, or you're causing people to have a likelier outcome of death by starvation in the third world. Now, when it comes to the other difference, identifiability of the victim, he gives this kind of weird, long-winded example of a person who sells a product that doubles your risk of getting stomach cancer. Suppose someone sells that product, and then later down the line, someone who bought it and consumed it gets the stomach cancer. So they come back to the salesperson and say, why though? Why did you do this? That was terrible. Now I've got stomach cancer. It's your fault. Couldn't the salesperson maybe say, well, maybe it's my fault, but maybe you got it from something else. Who can really prove that it came from me? So does that mean he's done nothing wrong? No. It still is wrong because even if we cannot precisely say who it is who has been harmed by his product, we know that it added risk. So when you withhold aid, there's no way we can point out a specific person somewhere in the world who died because you chose not to give money. So it's not like we can identify your victim, as it were, unlike the case of killing where the victims are clear. But still, you add to the risk that some people will face despite the fact that you cannot identify these victims. And so on a par with the salesperson, it's still wrong. I gave you a different example, I think, in lecture where I said, suppose someone walks around with no mask and they don't distance. And later on it comes to light that that person had coronavirus and someone that they were exposed to also got it. Imagine that that second person says, why did you walk around with no mask and refuse to distance? I now have coronavirus and I'm blaming you. The person might say, like our salesperson did, I don't know, maybe you got it from me, but you might have been lucky you didn't get it from me, and then later on the same day you had an interaction with someone on the street and you got it from them. So does that mean he's innocent of doing anything wrong just because we can't prove who came to harm because he was negligent? No. And so again, it's the same point again compared to your act of not giving to the poor. And then the whole thing about not hard to avoid killing, but hard to save all the lives that you can. He says, well, I wasn't really arguing that you have to save all the lives that you can, just do more than nothing at all. And so if that's the case, it's not such a difficult burden anyway. And then the last thing, I'm going over all of them, even though the question only asks you to give his responses to 2. So take it for what it is. But the other one is not my fault that they're poor. Well, he says, first of all, who knows if that's really true? I mean, in a way, you could argue that some of us, it is at least indirectly that we're benefiting from unjust, ill-gotten gains in the past, colonialism, economic exploitation of the third world. So maybe then, because we continue to benefit, some of us, from those injustices in the past, we should do something to make things more equal and fair now. But if you don't agree with that, and we don't even have indirect responsibility for causing these issues of haves and have-nots globally, then you should still just be a utilitarian, he says. And a utilitarian believes that you should just do whatever you can to improve on overall human happiness. It doesn't matter whether or not you're the cause of people being unhappy in the first place. Okay, so that's a question that does not require all that information if you actually were given it on the test, but I'm kind of just being exhaustive and covering every difference in every reply. There's 5 of them in total, but the question just asks you to speak to 2. Okay, so let's go back then into the list of questions that you're asking about. Summer, you asked about 25. Okay, so let me take a look at what that is. Cool. Yeah. So, how does Mill reply to the? Thanks, Alicia. Yes. Number 25. Explain Mill's response to the claim that utilitarianism is a theory fit for swine. Okay. So we need a few pieces on the table here. Why does a person that doesn't like utilitarianism say that it's for swine? Explain that. Tell me why has somebody said that utilitarianism, according to their view, is a theory fit for swine? What is it about the theory, or swine, or both, that would make somebody say that they think it's a theory fit for swine? So first we got to understand, what is the objection? That's what I'm trying to ask you. So why would utilitarianism be a theory fit for swine? Let me know. Why though? Why say it's a theory for swine? At least that thing is easy enough to say. I know though, well, why though would someone say it's living like a pig? Jasmine, you say, because we humans are able to prosper and do better than just accept the bare minimum of happiness. Yeah, basically right. Alicia, because swine only care about pleasure and nothing else. Okay, good. So that's what he does say. He says, well, he doesn't say it, his opponent says it. So Mill comes out and he's like, the right thing to do always is just to do whatever creates the most overall happiness and pleasure for everybody. But somebody might say, well, why though? Because happiness and pleasure is something that's animalistic. That's what pigs and things are all about. But we're smarter than pigs. We're smarter than lower animals. So shouldn't we have a more worthy goal than just the base pursuit of pleasure? I mean, that almost sounds like you're telling me go out there and live like a hog or something. But I'm a human, so that's wrong. What does Mill say in reaction to that? So what is Mill's counter argument against that objection? Because that's what the question asks. So we got through the first part of your response, which is, what is the objection? But how does he try to defeat the objection? When somebody says to Mill, yo, that's for swine, what you're saying, what does he say back? Now you're Mill, okay? And I'm coming at you like, your theory is for swine. What do you say to me? So then once you tell me, then that'll be good and we'll have this answer clear. Okay, so Spencer, there's a difference between base pleasures and higher pleasures. That's right. So what can you say about those two concepts? What is the definition of higher and lower pleasures? Humans do seek higher pleasures. We can also, of course, enjoy the lower ones as well. But since we can access those better, higher ones, he says, I wasn't just talking about lower pleasures. So you must have misunderstood when I said promote as much happiness, pleasure as possible. You must have just zapped to the thought, well, that's all lower pleasures, but there's lower and higher. But we need a little last element of detail. Someone needs to tell me the definition of lower and higher, maybe give some examples of both, and then we'll be fine. So you're on the right track there, Spencer, but obviously we just want to have a little bit of content surrounding what are those higher and lower pleasures, or what's the meaning of those concepts. Just unpack that a little bit, you know? Information that still has to be stated. So what are those things? Okay, Alicia, higher pleasures. Well, you're giving examples. The logical order of things is usually you define the concept, then you provide examples. But yes, those are examples. Higher pleasures are things that, now I'm going to just define it for you. They are the kind of pleasures that only intelligent human beings can enjoy. Okay, so things that are not for animals. Okay, reading books, doing math problems, listening to music, playing music, watching films, reading poems, going to class, studying books in school. Okay, using technology, driving around, playing sports, being a referee in the sport. I don't know. You know, so there's so many things that we are only able to do because it takes higher knowledge and a higher form of cognitive function than animals have. Not to disrespect animals. I love animals. You know, you see that I have cats, but they're not as smart, of course, as humans are. So anyway, higher pleasures only for humans. Things like what you mentioned and that I just said in passing. Lower pleasures, what's the definition there? Or what are some examples? Can anyone throw that out there? Okay, so you give again examples, Summer, and yes, those are fine examples. The definition that categorizes the examples is these are pleasures that lower animals, non-human animals, are capable of enjoying. So yeah, sleeping, eating, sex, I don't know, just motion, activity, maybe certain forms of touch. You know, animals can and do enjoy those things. Humans can out also, but we're not limited to the lower pleasures. So our lives are more rich, more nuanced, subtle, sophisticated, deep, because we have those higher pleasures. So here's the back and forth. Mill says, ethically speaking, we should be trying to promote as much pleasure as possible for as many people as possible. Critic comes through and he's like, wait though, that sounds like it's for pigs. Pleasure, really? I mean, aren't we better than just going after pleasure all the time? Mill says, well, actually there's two kinds of pleasure though. There's lower and there's higher. So I never said just go out and seek the lower pleasures above everything else. So that's where it seems like you thought that I said that, but no, I'm talking about both higher and lower. And Mill even goes further than that. He says, not only do we have higher pleasures, but they're better, they're more important. And I would give them greater weight in comparing them against these lower pleasures. So he thinks it's not for swine then. There's different types of pleasures that we can enjoy. And so if utilitarianism tells us to promote all of those, but especially the higher ones, then he says it's not really for swine. There's pleasure that swine can't enjoy. So once we understand that, you'll see that it's not just about the lower pleasures. Okay, so that's cool. Scrolling back up to see what other questions there were in there. Christian, you talked about 24. Okay, that I think is easy enough to describe. It says, explain Mill's claim that happiness is the only thing that we pursue as an end and not as a means. So for us to get the answer to that, we have to remember and say, what are the terms means and ends refer to? So who could tell me what is an end in the sense defined in ethics? An end is what kind of thing? I think you know, so I'll just hang in there a minute and let you collect your thoughts. But what is an end? Okay, ends are goals or objectives, correct. They're the things that you're hoping to achieve, that you want to accomplish. So then what are means in relation to ends? If the end is the goal / objective, then what are the means? That's the next piece of this answer. So what are means? Correct, Anthony, yeah. So means are just the things that you do or the actions that you take to achieve the goals or objectives, the ends. Okay, so ends, goals, means, whatever you do to get there. So, like, for example, you have a lot of goals. I know that because you're in college. So you must be doing it because you have goals that college will help you get to. So maybe you have a goal of nice, you want to be wealthy or something. You want to have a good amount of money. Well, maybe you think that one means to that goal is, of course, to have a career. And a means to that goal is to complete your education. And a means to that goal is taking these classes, enrolling in them, and getting good grades. So everything you're doing is directed at some kind of objectives that you must have. So when he says that happiness or pleasure is the only thing that we pursue as an end and not as a means, he's simply saying that the only goal that any of us have is pleasure. Nothing else is the goal. That's the only goal. Everything else that you want in life, why do you want it? You want it because you think that it will somehow lead to goal, which is the ultimate thing you're pursuing. So we're all pursuing our personal happiness, and everything you do from the first to the last action you take is directed at the goal of becoming more happy and more pleased. Sometimes the things that you do to get to the happiness are not necessarily fun and enjoyable, right? Like sometimes the means that you have to take to get there in the end are less than fully pleasurable. Like right now you're in school, and maybe you can relate to the concept that sometimes school is a little bit of stressful. It's sometimes not so much fun, right? Having to be constantly evaluated, judged, having your work criticized, sometimes getting bad grades and feeling like you worked hard. So it can be a struggle, right? And some of the steps along the way, you might be like, this is frustrating. I wish I was doing something else more fun. So why then are you doing it? Well, because you know that if you continue through these means, ultimately there's some kind of pleasure or happiness waiting for you at the end. That's like the carrot that you're chasing as you do all these things. I could make other examples, like working out. Sometimes these workouts could be very brutal, strenuous, uncomfortable, painful even. So why would you do that? Because you like the results at the end. And that's the thing that gives you happiness or pleasure. So we pursue pleasure in ever so many different ways. But that's a universal goal of everybody. Everyone wants happiness. Maybe the things that make each of us happy are a little different from case to case. But he says that's a universal fact about the human condition and really just being any life form. We want pleasure and happiness for ourselves. So that's why Mill says, if you just think about your own goals and where they're all headed, in the end, it's because you want happiness. So that's why he claims that happiness/pleasure is the sort of centerpiece of his ethical system. If it's what everyone wants and what we all recognize to be a good thing, then making more of it for everybody would be the right way to live ethically. Okay, so that's the 24 and some discussion of it. I saw, Sarah, you mentioned 22, so let me look at that one. Okay, so 22 talks about the paper by Nicholas Everett, Theism and Modern Science. When we read him, he talked about how this universe that we are in, at least according to science, does not seem to be the way you would have thought if it was really something created by a creator God with the specific human beings in mind. So if God created the universe for the sake of human beings specifically, then we would expect it to have certain qualities or features. And in 22, he points out that science doesn't show that the world or universe has these features. So that's the question, who can tell me? What are the things about the universe that science, he says, the way that the universe is according to science that's out of line with what you would have thought based on religion? So there's like 4 points basically that Everett makes here. He says, if this universe was created by God, it would be like blank, 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 and blank. But science says none of that is true. So who can tell me what I'm hinting at there? And yes, Nicholas, we'll get into that next. How does this author, Nicholas Everett, make the case that science and its findings, this is 22, that science contradicts religious assumptions about God creating the universe? So Earth not the center of everything, one thing, that's true. So he says if God really made this for us, the whole universe, then we should have center stage, right? Because we're the children of God, created in his image. And that means that everything should kind of revolve around us, which is what antiquity did believe until we had Copernicus and Galileo. So science shows, though, after Copernicus and Galileo and all these new discoveries of science, that we're not in the middle even of our local solar system. That's just one point, though. Come on, keep it going. So what's next? Nicholas, good. Mankind did not appear early on in the universe. So you would have thought that, Not only would we be in the center if God made this all for us, but if he did make it all for us, then wouldn't he have created us at the beginning? What would be the point of delaying the appearance of man for billions of years after the inception of the universe if the whole universe was created by this being just for us? So you'd think we'd be way in the beginning, but again, science seems to contradict that, because according to scientific research, the form Homo sapiens, this mammal life form that we are, has only existed on the planet Earth for like 100,000 years or so. Okay, so we should appear early, but doesn't seem so according to science. We should be in the middle, but doesn't seem so according to science. We should have come not too much longer after the other animals. Good, Alicia, he also says that. But again, according to science, the long process of evolution didn't just spit out humans at the beginning. It started with very unsophisticated single cellular life forms, and took billions of years actually to evolve into these more sophisticated vertebrate mammalian life forms that we are. And then finally, the universe is just so big. If God created it just for the sake of humans to live in it, the universe, then why did he create all this extra space? It'd be like creating a house with infinite rooms for people that can only live in a tiny piece of it. So what's the reason for all that additional space? You'd think that the universe would be condensed down to the human scale, but it's not, according to science. Okay, so anyway, you'd think we'd appear early, not long after the other animals, be in the middle, and that the universe would be at our size in terms of magnitude. But scientific consensus shows that none of those things at least appear to be true, so that's how he thinks science and religion are in contradiction with each other. And he thinks you kind of can't have it both ways, because science, it's inconsistent with these religious views. Okay, so then, Nicholas, I think you're asking there about number 26. Basic criticism of utilitarianism other than the theory fit for swine. Please take note of the wording, okay? It says other than. So it's very specifically saying to you, do not mention theory for swine in this question. It says, tell me about a different objection against utilitarianism. So I know we talked about at least two other ones. Maybe one of you guys could tell me what you think is another objection to the utilitarian ethical theory, which is different from theory for swine objection. What do you think? Another one. That's one, yes, Alicia. It's too demanding, okay? I'll explain that a little bit. One more, so that we have a full set of options. So yeah, you could also add the other objection that it's too demanding to really live that way, as a utilitarian says you're supposed to. Too much of a burden, impossible to really live up to that standard. One more though. The last one I think is actually the biggest one. Just need the one more. So it would be like the same section of notes. If you're just going off memory, maybe you don't remember it, but if you have notes, or if you read the book, you'll see the same point mentioned there. Okay, it's no type of action is totally ruled out. That's right, Tina. Okay, now you can't just write that statement. You have to explain it. So why would it be too demanding? Okay, in utilitarianism, they say your duty is to always just do whatever creates the most overall happiness. But in some cases that are easy to imagine, that would require you to abandon the interests of people who you know and have a better relationship with, and instead favor the interests of a larger group of people who you have no standing bonds or ties to. Like I gave you this example to think about. Suppose that you're present on a scene of a fire where two different adjacent houses are burning. And in one of them, you have one individual trapped inside who you could save their life. And you love that person, and you have a long relationship and a bond with them. So you have a reason, like you want to save them. But in the other case, there's another house that's also right there. And let's say this has got a lot more people in it. It's occupied by like a big family gathering of 10. But you don't know those people. Sure, they're good people. You have no reason to dislike them, but you have no relationship with them. So what should you do if you're a utilitarian? Well, the utilitarian would say, sorry for you and your friend, but there's more people in the other house. So if you focus on saving your friend while all those people burn, you're not saving the maximum amount of human beings, and so you're not promoting the most overall happiness. Is that reasonable? Is that the right obligation? Some might think so, but for a lot of us, it just seems a bridge too far to be expected to just robotically act in the way that creates the most utility, even when it strikes against fundamental concepts of familiarity and partiality. Okay, and another possible objection here is the one you mentioned there, Tina, that no type of action is totally forbidden by the theory of utilitarianism. So in utilitarianism, we can never say that an action is totally ruled out, whether it's lying, stealing, or even killing. Is lying always wrong? Well, many think so, but in utilitarianism, it just depends. It depends on the consequences of either telling the truth or lying. So if lying creates more happiness than telling the truth, then utilitarianism says you're supposed to lie there. Sometimes that might not bother you. You think sometimes a lie could be done for the right reason because it's trying to make people happy. But how far do we allow that principle to go? It seems like it could lead to just widespread lying whenever you think that it's going to make people happier. Stealing, another case. Utilitarianism would say that just depends whether it's right or wrong. Is the net result of stealing going to create more happiness than neglecting to steal? If so, then you should steal, like Robin Hood or somebody. But again, this would eliminate over time perhaps the whole concept of property rights. And many people think that's just unreasonable. And then finally, killing an innocent person. I mean, for me anyway, that's something that's totally out of bounds morally. Like, it could never be okay to take an innocent person's life without, against the person's will, obviously. But even that, according to utilitarian theory, we can dream of cases where, like, one person is killed, their organs are split off and given to 5 people that need transplants. I mean, most of us would say that's murder and that's fundamentally immoral. But in utilitarian theory, it's at least within bounds of permissibility because it saves more lives than if you had not harmed one person. Okay, so we've got 2 further objections, and I just went through some explanation there. That it's just too demanding, or that no action is completely ruled out in principle. Okay, so what do you think can be our next topic? Still have a good amount of time, almost 30 minutes. So I'm just I'm hanging in there with you, and whenever you have a question, let's just take it in whatever order. Number 4, Tina? Okay. Reductio ad absurdum. Okay, so what is reductio ad absurdum? It's a logical technique of argument. So when you're trying to make a case for something or prove something, you might utilize the method they call reductio ad absurdum to do that. Now, reductio ad absurdum is a phrase that's taken from Latin. In Latin, it means to reduce to absurdity. Does anybody have a memory or something about what is reductio ad absurdum and how you do that? If I want to prove something, how do you think I could utilize this reductio method to make the proof? Let's see if you have something in mind. I'll just wait a moment and see what you can give me. Or if you have nothing, then I'll help you even more. But, okay, Kirsten, good. When you use reductio ad absurdum, you want to prove something. So you start off by assuming the exact opposite of what you want to prove, just for the sake of argument. There's that example, Anthony. Let me hold your thought, and I'll mention that in a minute. But you assume the opposite of what you really want to prove. So say that somebody told you that, I don't know, Dr. Vulich died the other day or something, okay? And you're like, no, he didn't. And they're like, yeah, that's what I heard. Okay, so to do this proof, you would say, okay, well, let's just suppose that he did, right? And then you could like show them your phone where I'm lecturing at you live, and they're like, if he's dead, then this means I'm talking to a ghost right now. But that's absurd. So obviously he's not. You understand? So like you assume the opposite, but then you show that if that was really true, that something ridiculous or absurd would have to be the case by implication. And since that's impossible, it eliminates the contrary assumption, and your original view has been proven. So with the flat Earth case, another example I can go with that you mentioned here, Anthony, suppose that someone says this is a flat planet, and I tell them, no, it's not. And they're like, yeah, it is. So I'm like, it isn't. Here, I'll make the case. I'll make an argument. You say it's flat, I say it's not. So let's do a reductio. I'm going to assume your side, the opposite of my view. Let's assume it's flat, okay? Assuming the Earth is flat, that implies that objects just fall off the edge, or that satellites that are supposed to be orbiting the planet in a smooth elliptical free fall are somehow not doing that, or that photos that have been taken from space of the surface of the Earth are somehow faked. But all of those things are absurd. We know that, so it just can't be flat. Okay, so like notice that when I made my argument that it is not flat, I had this like little quick dip into the assumption that it is. And then I showed, on the basis of that assumption, how things that are absurd would have to be true. And we know that these absurd and impossible things can't be true, so therefore the negation of my view is false. In other words, mine is true. Okay, so that's reductio ad absurdum. It was used in Anselm's argument. St. Anselm says, when you're talking about God, he does not just only exist in your head like a unicorn or a dragon or a leprechaun. He's real. He's not only in the mind. Suppose he was only in the mind, though, opposite of what I'm arguing. If he was, then he wouldn't be the greatest conceivable being. But that's absurd because that's his definition. So he has to exist not just in the mind, but in the mind and in reality. And then, you've got Gaunilo, who said, Anselm's argument doesn't prove anything. Suppose that it does, though. If it does, then it also proves the existence of this island. Ha ha, that's absurd. So we know that that argument's not proof. Okay, great. So I think we're good on that for the moment anyways. What's next, you guys think? Okay, Sarah. Number 10, argument from design. Okay, William Paley, the argument from design. So let's walk through the steps of this argument. From beginning to end, top to bottom. How does he begin? What's the first example that the author William Paley uses? He says, suppose that you saw or found what? So let's get the stage set for this design argument. One way to think about how to be like the explainer of some of these arguments is like, imagine you're explaining to a person who has less experience with philosophy than you. I mean, I know you're just getting into it, but like imagine that you had like a little sibling, a sophomore or something in high school, and like, what do you study in college? I heard about philosophy. Isn't that crazy and weird? Like, what are they teaching you? You say, well, they taught us the design argument. They're like, huh? What is that? Now you're the teacher. Teach this person. What is the design argument? Tell me how it goes. I need help. I need your help. I can't do it. Tell me. Come on my birthday, you're going to leave me hanging? Let's go. Come on. What's the design argument? I'm just playing, but seriously, though, what do you think? Okay, Anthony, so watch example starts it off. That sets the whole argument off. So he says, suppose you found a watch like in the forest. You already know it had to come from something intelligent, right? Why? Well, because look at a watch. It tells time, and it's got all these complex pieces in it that have to be just so carefully arranged for it to do that. So no way that the watch can somehow fall into place through just luck or chance or randomness, So what point then can we take away from this example of the watch? That if something is out there that has some complex function and all these detailed arrangement of parts that allow it to do that, then it must have had an intelligent designer, right? No one would think a watch could come about from pieces of the watch somehow just spontaneously manifesting with no intelligent being or architect guiding their construction. Okay, so let me see what else you guys have said. I don't want to go too far. Watch example, if something has a purpose, function, and internal complexity, must have come from an intelligent designer? Yes. Tina, walking into the woods, seeing a watch, you'd assume that someone had to make it because it's complex? Yes. Alicia, everything that is complex has an intelligent designer. So nature has an intelligent designer, which is God. Good, so you're already getting to the other side of the analogy, which is what you want to ultimately do. It starts with the watch and the observation that it had to come from something that's got intelligence, a creator. Well, he extends then that analogy to things that are in nature. He highlights the example of the eye. The eye is a very impressive thing because it can see. And all the little biological components, the rods and the cones inside of your retina and all that, those things have to be just so carefully arranged and pieced together for vision to be possible. So if a watch can't happen without a maker, because it's too complex and functional, then an eye cannot happen without a maker because it's too complex and functional. So the watchmaker stands to the watch as the creator of the universe or nature stands to the eye, and that would be God. Okay? So there's this watch to eye analogy, and the common feature of both is that they're complex and functional. If we have to have this assumption about the watch that it comes from intelligence, and creation, not just randomness and chance, then that has to be also true of the eye and other things in nature that exhibit purpose and function. So the eye is just, one chosen example, but he could have chosen anything else: the wings of a bird, the sonar echolocation of aquatic mammals or bats, photosynthesis, the digestive system, the nose, ears, the list goes on. So those are things that are found in nature, not man-made, but they exhibit complexity and function that even surpasses the man-made objects that we can make. So he thinks they've got to have intelligent creation behind them too. Okay, so thank you. And next, I guess, question from you. This is easy. Just tell me your question, or we could just hang out and chill. But I figure you want to get these questions in, so let us know. Okay, so I see two suggested numbers. Anthony, you say number 12. Nagel's critique of the cosmological argument. Okay, that one I think we can deal with pretty quickly. Ernest Nagel doesn't like any of these arguments that God exists. He's an atheist. So, he finds fault with all of them, otherwise he'd be a believer. But why does he not like the cosmological argument specifically? So, cosmological argument we talked about already, the one that says everything has to have a cause, everything has to come from something, and the universe is something that exists, so it has to have a cause. I'm skipping some steps, but basically, universe exists, it has to have a cause just as much as every particular thing does. So what could cause the universe? Not itself, not something contingent, because an infinite regress is impossible. So it had to be a necessary being. That's God. What does Nagel say? Why is that wrong? You're Nagel. I'm telling you, hey, God exists. Look, there had to be a creator of everything, right? The universe can't create itself, can't be an infinite regress. Come on, Ernest, what do you say to that? Okay, good, Summer. Why doesn't God have to have a cause? He asks that question. If everything has to have a cause, like the argument says, then how can we say God doesn't have to have one? Which one is it? Everything has a cause or something doesn't? Sounds like the argument kind of says both things, which is inconsistent. And then Alicia, he wonders why everything has to have a cause since God doesn't have a cause, and he also questions why the infinite regress is impossible. Yeah, one piece of the cosmological argument says, no way could we have contingent causes going back to infinity with no start. But Nagel says that's not necessarily impossible, because if you look at math or geometry, we actually do have some kind of working understanding of actually infinite series of numbers or actually infinite series of linear density points on a geometric line. So maybe an infinite regress is something conceivable. Like our universe has as much infinite information in it as the number series does. Okay. One other thing was this: if there could be something with no cause, like the God is claimed to be by the argument, then how come the universe can't just be something that lacks cause and it's just the universe is the necessary being itself? At least we know the universe exists. I mean, look around you. Proof taken. You could just see it. You could touch it. This is it. But God's existence is claimed as something that's separate from the whole physical universe. Well, at least if the universe was thought of as the necessary being, there would be no need to try and explain the weird relationship between something that's outside of it and then the universe itself. But anyway, those are his points of rebuttal. He says, are you sure everything has to have a cause? Or even if it does, then why doesn't God need one? Or if he doesn't need one, then how come the universe has to have one, like you say? And also, why is an infinite regress impossible? I don't see that, because maybe we can understand the concept of infinity. Okay, so good. That's for your question, Anthony, about number 12. Summer, you say 29? Both versions of Kant's categorical imperative. All right, good. So Kant, the famous German moral philosopher, he has this ethical principle which he calls the categorical imperative. And he says that if you want to determine what the moral law is and what it tells you you can and can't do, you have to use your reason and apply this categorical imperative to your behavior. And it'll give you the answer whether that's okay or not. He says there's two versions of the categorical imperative, okay? So the question here, 29, asks you to report on both of them. So who can tell me what is one or two of the versions of Kant's categorical imperative? One has to do with the word maxim, and you'll tell me more, and the other one has to do with the concept of the means, but you'll say more too about that. So if that's a hint, maybe that helps a bit to stimulate your memory. But yeah, the two different versions of the one categorical imperative, what are they? Okay, so Alicia, you say this. First version, act always so that your maxim could be willed to be a universal law. That's correct. Anthony, you're adding some further detail. That's good. The form of a maxim, that a person will do certain action in certain conditions. Yes. Now, can we lay out the second version also before I go into some further explanation maybe? That's the first version, and that's good. It requires a little explanation, but we can get there in a minute. But what's the second version if you know? It's something about how you should or shouldn't treat human beings as a what? Okay, Kirsten, very good. Never treat a human being, well, sorry, you actually had a little backwards though. Well, I think you meant to write it because I can see that it just seems to be a typo. But yeah, never treat a human being as a means to an end. That's what we want. Never treat a human being as a instrument or a tool to use in order to achieve some kind of personal goal that you must have. Don't do that to people. Okay, so the first version, only act according to maxims that could be universal laws. First of all, a maxim is an individual's individual policy statement or principle of action. It essentially says what you wrote, Anthony. The form of it is a person says what they will do in given circumstances. So like in my case, let's say I will teach a philosophy lecture when it is the scheduled time. I'm the professor, that's my principle. That's why we're having this lecture right now, because I don't like to cancel class. So I will hold those lectures when they're scheduled. Now, what if that's a universal law? Then the universal law says all professors will hold their lectures when they're scheduled. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not impossible, and that's not contradictory, and it's not undesirable. So that action passes the bar of the moral law. But some actions, when you imagine them being universal, could never be universal laws. Like say that I want to borrow money from someone with the full intent to not repay, but I want to promise them I'll repay just so that they give it to me in the first place. So in that individual case, my maxim would be, I will lie about repaying loans when I want money. But if that was the universal law, then the rule, not the exception, would be that everybody who ever asks for a loan is lying when they ask for it, or they're lying about repaying it. Now imagine that. If every single loan request was defaulted on because everybody lied, then no one would generate or grant the loans because they would know that everyone lies about it and that's the rule. So if that was true, then our liar who's trying to get the loan wouldn't even be able to succeed because it would be the universal norm that everyone lies and no one would believe such statements. So the liar or whoever is actually wanting most people to follow the rule of telling the truth so that their own lie will be assumed to be true. So you know it's wrong already because you're doing something that wouldn't work if everybody did it. Even your own action wouldn't work here if everybody did the same thing on the same basis. Or I can give you more examples. You want to take a free ride on the, I don't know, what's a good example? You're going to step into the subway without paying the fare. So you're going to just take a free ride. Jump the turnstile, like they say. So the person's maxim is, I will not pay when I take the subway. Okay, if that's a universal law, then 100% of the passengers won't pay. But imagine that. In that case, there's no longer any way to fund this subway, and so the service would have to be suspended or discontinued. And if that's the case, then even the free rider wouldn't have a subway that functions that they could ride for free on. So they know they're doing something wrong because if it were universalized, it would be impossible for the action to even have any point. Okay, so that's the first version. Check when you do stuff that the principle you're acting on could be a universal law. And if it could not, or if you wouldn't even want it to be, then you know you're doing something wrong. Okay, now the second categorical imperative version is don't treat human beings as a means to an end. So we've already sort of talked about ends and means. An end is a goal. Means are the things that you do to get there. So you're not supposed to treat human beings as though they're just things that you use to get to your goals. You're supposed to treat human beings like they are the goal. So there's all kinds of terrible things that people do to others, which is basically using the person. If I steal from someone, I'm using them for my own enrichment. And of course, the act of theft they've not agreed to. If a person is raped, terrible thing to even contemplate. But if a person is raped, then they're being used as a means to the perverse pleasure of the attacker, and they're not treated as an end. So human beings are not to be used as things or tools to exploit in the service of your own goals. If and when another person is useful or beneficial to you, it has to be because they choose through their own volition to be so serviceable. But if you hide from them your true intent, or if you don't even give them an opportunity to agree, then you're involving them in an interaction that they wouldn't consent to, and that's using them as a means. So just don't use people kind of as a second version, but some examples ought to be listed. In the first case, only act according to appropriate principles that could become universal. Okay, so very good. We still have, 9 minutes, so that's enough time to maybe talk about one or maybe two more. So whatever, if you want to call something out, we can try and go there, whatever's next. Oh, so wait, never mind, that we got that one. Okay, so Tina, you asked about 9. Principle of sufficient reason and how it relates to a proof of God's existence. In a way, to be fair, this question is very similar in content to question 8, but I guess it emphasizes the principle of sufficient reason a little more. So since we've already kind of covered this, I'll make short work of it. The principle of sufficient reason says that in the case of any positive truth, there is some sufficient reason for it. In other words, there is a cause or an explanation for any fact. This principle is illustrated by Taylor through the consideration of the sphere example, which leads to the intuition that seeing something so uncommon would naturally generate the reaction of curiosity. How did it get there, and what's the reason that it exists? So once we notice that everything has to have a cause, we can apply that principle to the existence of the whole universe, which, as much as the sphere or any other case, has to have a cause based on that principle. What could be the cause of the universe? Not itself, not something contingent, because an infinite regress is impossible. So it must be a necessary being, namely God. Okay. And what next? Sarah 15, okay. The problem of evil, Ernest Nagel presents this in the book. So let's try and deal with that. The problem of evil is an atheist argument. It's an argument that's trying to show that there's no God. So why or how does a person make this argument? What do you think? Problem of evil? In a way, it's a pretty straightforward argument. But let's see if you can tell me about it. If God exists, or if he doesn't, or if he existed, the argument says that if he did, then what? Then we shouldn't have certain things, like what? Okay, right, Tina. If God did exist, then there would not be any evil. That's the first premise of the argument. How does it continue? So if God existed, there'd be no evil in the world, but there is evil, and so therefore there's no God. Yes, that's the full argument. And if this was selected, you'd want to try and just give a little bit of commentary on the various claims of the argument. So why does a person make the case that if God existed, there would not be evil? Some say this just because they think that God would be perfectly good, infinitely good, and also infinitely powerful, omnipotent and omnibenevolent. So suppose that God has all this power, he could do anything, including stop evil right now. And if he's infinitely good, good is opposite of evil. So a being that has perfect goodness and perfect power, you would think would have the means and the motive to not let evil happen. But looking at the world, there's a lot of evil stuff according to the argument. I mean, had a mass shooting yesterday in Atlanta, innocent people killed. That's just one example. I mean, there was the Holocaust. There's, people getting tortured, raped, all kinds of horrifying things happening all the time. Hopefully not to any of us, and hopefully not as much as we've seen in the past. But anyway, bad things can happen, even to good people. So if God existed, the argument says none of that stuff should happen, because if God was there, he wouldn't let it happen. He'd have the power to stop it, and he wouldn't want it. But it's there, so there must not be a God. That's the argument. Okay. So, Jasmine, you talked about 39. Tragedy of the Commons from Garrett Hardin. Garrett Hardin argued that we have no obligation to provide for or give aid to the global poor. He says we have no obligations to those that are living in absolute poverty or hunger. And let's see, one of the reasons that he mentions about saying that is the so-called tragedy of the commons. So does anyone have a thought or memory about what is the tragedy of the commons? It's part of the reason that Hardin thinks global aid and the World Food Bank and stuff is not wise, or it's bound to fail. But just fill in a little of the detail if you could. What is the tragedy of the commons? Okay, good, Alicia. So when public resources inevitably fail due to overuse and poor maintenance, and one last little element, unlike private resources. So it's a comparative, like public resources fail, okay, that's right, Alicia, but private resources don't. Can you remember the example that he mentions here? He gives a little example to back that up. He says, think about this. Say there was an acre of land, and we say this is an acre of farming land that you can use for animals to graze on, right? What if we opened that to the public and we say, hey, it's public. It's publicly available. If you're a farmer and you have animals, bring them down because this is open to anyone that wants that or has that need. Okay, so he says what will really happen then is, since it's open to everyone and there's no restrictions, everyone will come. A lot of people will come and they'll bring their animals. Now it's going to be overflooded with too many animals and too many people that are all taking use of it. So they overgraze the field. It destroys its fertility and it destroys the ability that it has to support any animals. Also, nobody's picking up after themselves because why would they? I mean, it's not their property privately. So that's a recipe for failure. Everyone's using it, no one's taking care of it, so it gets overutilized, poorly managed, and pretty soon the commons is not available for even anybody. But if a private owner owns that same 1 acre, a private owner would not want to put too many animals on their properties so that it destroys the value of their investment, because then they're the ones who lose because they've invested into it personally. And also, since it's your property, you have every desire to keep it in good shape and to allow it to be perpetuated into the future and sustained. So private property is well taken care of and not overused. Public property, just the opposite. So that's why he says it's tragic maybe if we could be a little bit more conscientious and willing to limit our access to resources or do more to support them, then maybe this wouldn't happen. But human beings being what we are, we want to exploit a resource for the maximum benefit to ourselves at the least cost in terms of labor, work, and upkeep. So when we make things public, everyone wants to use them. No one wants to deal with them or take care of them. And so those things get ruined. Now, in the larger scope of his argument, he's saying the World Food Bank is another one of these commons, and it would be foolish to support it, even if it looks nice or seems humanitarian. Because he says this is establishing a bank of food that poor nations can just draw from freely, and the donor nations are the ones that supply the surplus amounts of food. But he says, once again, it'll be a commons that fails because everyone will draw from it and expand the size of their populations through the reliance on the aid until such time as the group has grown too large to further support. And now we have a bigger problem, a bigger cohort of poor people than we had before we provided the aid, and still they're poor and still they're in need. So the problem just gets worse. That's what he says anyway. I don't really agree with much of that at all, but so it is. Okay, guys, so I figure we are really right there at the end. It's about 3:44, so maybe it's time to call it a day for now. But been great to be with you guys on my birthday. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Again, like I've said, I'm going to be replying to all those that have sent me requests for grades, so you'll certainly be getting your answer, if not today, then in short order. And yeah, on Monday you'll have your midterm exam based on these questions in the study guide. You're going to have to answer like maybe 7 of them from a curated list of 11 or so, and I'm just going to randomly select 11 questions on that day. The exam is going to be in your house. Well, where is it going to be? I'm going to post it to Titanium. I'm going to post it to Titanium just before the 2:30 p.m. class time, and then you're going to have until 3:45 to complete your answers and return them to me as an attached file. You can type your answers and send it to me as a Word file, PDF, Google Doc, Pages. Just make sure I have access to it and that there's no restrictions on my access to it. On the other hand, you might want to write them handwritten. If so, you can scan Pages and send me those. But in whatever format, make sure to send me your answers before class time expires at 3:45, and that's the way that the Monday meeting will go. There's not going to be any lecture. There's not going to be this YouTube stuff. We won't be on Zoom or anything else. You're just going to receive the test as a Titanium announcement prior to class time, in the minutes leading up to class time. So just be ready to receive my exam at 2:30, and then you'll have your 75-minute period to fill in the answers to the selected questions. Okay, guys. So thanks again. It's been a good meeting. Hopefully this is helpful, and I'll be in touch with you. If you have requested a grade for your first essay. Okay, guys. So take it easy. Have a good weekend, and I'll be in touch. See you soon. Okay. Bye-bye. Thanks.